Ever imagine tearing out a pool could be a chill weekend project? Think again. I set out to spruce up my backyard, only to find myself smack in the middle of an epic showdown. Enter the neighborhood's self-appointed hero, who decided my modest DIY fix was a full-on assault on the community. Spoiler alert, she wasn't big on logic, but loved a good spectacle. What began as a simple demolition job spiraled into a war I never saw coming. Stick around to see how this madness unfolded. Comment below with the wildest neighbor drama you've ever witnessed. It all kicked off on a crisp October Saturday morning. I'd been in my Maple Street home for 14 months, and that old pool had been a thorn in my side since day one. Cracked concrete, a busted filtration system, and murky green swamp water. Pool guys slapped me with quotes between $10,000 and $12,000 to patch it up, but I figured I could rip it out and pour a concrete pad for just $3,000, finally carving out the workshop space I craved for my motorcycle repair gig. Knowing permits were key to dodging neighborhood headaches, I spent 2 weeks at City Hall dotting every I and crossing every T. Come Saturday, I was out there by 7 a.m., safety goggles on, work gloves snug, wielding a rented jackhammer. The October sun was just warming the concrete as I tackled the shallow end. There's something downright satisfying about demolition. The solid thunk of the jackhammer, the clean split of concrete chunks, the tangible progress with each swing. I was lost in my rhythm: break, scoop, haul to the dumpster, repeat, working harder than expected, but it was a good hard, the kind that leaves you feeling like a champ by day's end. That's when I heard the voice that would haunt my next 3 months. "What the hell are you doing to that beautiful pool?" The shriek came from somewhere behind me, high-pitched and furious. I looked up from my work to see a woman in her late 30s storming across my yard like she owned the place. She was dressed in designer athleisure, wear perfectly styled blonde hair that didn't move in the wind, and the kind of aggressive confidence that comes from years of getting your way through sheer volume and persistence. "Ma'am, I'm removing this pool," I said, pulling off my safety goggles and trying to keep my voice level. "It's been dead for years, and I need the space for a workshop." Vanessa Carter, though I didn't know her name yet, looked at me like I just announced plans to burn down the elementary school. Her face was flushed red, and her eyes had that wild look you see in people who are absolutely convinced they're right about everything all the time. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to our property values?" she demanded, gesturing wildly at the half-molished pool. "This is a neighborhood of character. People buy houses here because of amenities like pools." I tried to explain that the pool was beyond repair and the best decision for the property, but Vanessa wasn't interested in facts. She was consumed with control. "I've been in real estate for 15 years, she declared, "and I know what destroys neighborhoods. It's people like you who think they can just bulldo their way through the rules. This isn't just about a pool. It's about the integrity of our community." As I stood there, I felt the weight of her words. But something about her attitude bothered me. It wasn't just about property. It was about her need to control everything. I could see the frustration on the faces of my other neighbors as they quietly watched from their windows, some of them agreeing with her, others uneasy. But one neighbor, Tom, finally spoke up. "She's always been like this. She doesn't care about the value of your property. She cares about the power she has over all of us. The way she said it, you'd think I was planning to open a toxic waste dump instead of creating a clean workspace where I could actually be productive." What struck me most wasn't just her anger. It was the overwhelming sense of control she radiated like a queen ruling her domain. Vanessa strutted toward me with an air of unshakable authority. She positioned herself in front of me, with the kind of arrogance only someone who's used to always getting their way could muster, blocking my path like a living, breathing wall. "You're causing irreparable damage to the neighborhood's integrity," she said, voice rising with a strange mix of self-righteousness and fury. "You need to stop this madness immediately. You can't just bulldo through the community standards." She looked at me as though my very existence was an affront to her idea of order. The whole time she was talking, I kept thinking about those permits sitting on my kitchen counter, all properly filed and approved. But something told me, Vanessa, Carter wasn't the type to let facts get in the way of a good outrage. I spent the next 20 minutes trying to reason with her, explaining that I'd done my research, that I had all the necessary permits, that the pool was genuinely beyond repair. But every reasonable point I made just seemed to make her more angry. Finally, she stormed off my property with a parting shot that should have been my first real warning. "We'll see about that, Elliot Foster. We'll just see about that." The way she said my name told me she'd already been asking around about me, probably building some kind of case in her head. I watched her march back to her house 3 doors down, already pulling out her phone before she'd even reached her front door. I thought that conversation was over, but at 6 a.m. The very next morning, my doorbell rang. Opening the door, I found Vanessa, her eyes gleaming with that smug satisfaction, holding a thick folder like she was about to deliver the final blow. "Elliot," she said, her voice sweet as poison, "we need to discuss these serious legal violations." "Elliot," she said, sweet as poison, "we need to discuss these serious legal violations." Vanessa handed me a folder of documents claiming they were zoning laws I was violating. She pointed to one highlighted section, Local Ordinance 472B, which, she said, required approval for any major yard modifications. With a smug look, she acted as though she'd found a weapon to shut me down. "This isn't just about HOA rules. This is a legal requirement that could cost you thousands in fines if you don't comply." Standing there in my doorway at 6 a.m. and in nothing but boxer shorts and a t-shirt, I felt like I was being served legal papers by someone's overly dramatic aunt. Vanessa was dressed for business this time. Dark blazer, pressed slacks hair, pulled back in what I assume was her power ponytail. The transformation from yesterday's shrieking neighbor to today's pseudo-lawyer was almost impressive. "Almost now I'm prepared to be reasonable about this," she continued, stepping uninvited onto my front porch. "If you stop the demolition immediately and agree to consult with the proper authorities about restoration options, we can avoid involving the county authorities. I'll need to review these documents," I told her, reaching for the folder, "and I'll want to check them against the actual homeowner association paperwork I received when I bought the house." A sense of disbelief crept over me as I skimmed through what were obviously fake rules. Vanessa's confident smile flickered for just a moment, the first crack in her armor. "Well, of course, but I think you'll find everything is in order. I've been on the Architectural Review Committee for 3 years, and I know these regulations inside and out." She handed over the folder with the air of someone presenting evidence that would surely end all arguments. That evening, I spread Vanessa's documents across my kitchen table next to the actual homeowner association covenant I'd received at closing. It didn't take long to spot the problems. The section numbers she'd cited didn't exist. The language about structural removals appeared nowhere in the real documents. The supposed fine schedule was completely fabricated. What I did find was a clear section stating that the homeowner association had authority over new construction and additions, but absolutely nothing about removals or improvements to existing structures. Vanessa had literally made up her own rules. The next morning, I marched over to her house with both sets of documents. Vanessa answered the door in her robe. clearly not expecting a confrontation before her morning coffee. "These regulations you gave me don't match the actual homeowner association covenant," I said, holding up her folder. "In fact, most of these section numbers don't even exist in the real document." I watched her face cycle through surprise anger and then desperate defiance. "Well, there have been amendments to the original covenant. You might not have received the latest version. Then I'll need to see the official amended version." "With proper signatures and filing dates," I replied, "because according to the real covenant, the homeowner association has no authority over property improvements that don't add new structures." Vanessa's jaw tightened, and I could see her mind racing. "For a new angle of attack, it's just about technical language, Elliot. It's about community standards. What happens when everyone starts tearing down pools and turning this neighborhood into some kind of industrial zone? Property values affect all of us." And there it was, the real issue. This wasn't about homeowner association rules or community standards. This was about Vanessa Carter needing to control everything that happened within her line of sight. "My property, my pool, my money," I said simply, "and according to the actual rules we all agreed to when we bought houses here, I'm well within my rights." The conversation ended with Vanessa making vague threats about taking this to the proper authorities and seeing what the county has to say about unpermitted construction. That evening, I noticed Vanessa's lights staying on late into the night. Through her front window, I could see her hunched over what looked like a computer, probably researching new angles of attack. The next morning, I noticed her again, now more obsessed than ever, no longer just snapping photos. She was timing every move, capturing the dust, every scrape and any debris near her neighborhood values. This wasn't mere surveillance anymore, it was a calculated attack. She was building her case against me, and I knew I had to step up. What started as a neighborhood dispute was now escalating into something bigger, a fight for my right to exist in my own home without her watching my every move. Pool removal was now half complete when I noticed something disturbing about Vanessa's behavior. Every single morning, 7 a.m. sharp, she appeared with her phone camera photographing my progress from the same angle with the same methodical precision. Day 5, day 6, day 7, exact same ritual. It wasn't just casual documentation anymore. She was building a systematic record, probably preparing for some kind of formal complaint or legal challenge. Just as I was starting to think maybe the photo documentation was as far as she'd take things, I heard the unmistakable sound of a police cruiser pulling up outside my house. On day 5 of demolition, I looked up from hauling concrete chunks to see Detective Harperstone stepping out, notepad ready, serious expression on his face. Behind him, Vanessa emerged from behind the car like she'd been riding shotgun, arms crossed, with satisfaction radiating from every pore. "Mr. Foster," the detective said, walking toward me with professional calm, "we've received complaints about unpermitted construction." Detective Harperstone didn't waste time. He scanned the half-demolished pool, then glanced at the neat piles of debris, his eyes landing on the permits pinned to my back door. But just as I thought he was going to let me off, his gaze hardened. "Do you mind explaining why Vanessa Carter is so convinced you're breaking the law?" His question hit me like a punch in the gut. "Looks like there's some confusion here," he said, pulling out his notepad. "Can you walk me through what's going on?" Meanwhile, Vanessa hovered at the edge of my property like a prosecutor, waiting to present her case. She dressed up for the occasion. Business attire, hair perfectly styled, the whole 9 yards. You could tell she'd been looking forward to this moment, probably rehearsing her complaints since she'd made the call. "Officer Stone," she began, but the detective held up a polite hand. "Ma'am, I'll get your statement in a moment. Let me hear from Mr. Foster first." I could see Vanessa's frustration at not being able to immediately dominate the conversation, but she bit her tongue and waited her turn. I showed Detective Stone my permits, explained the condition of the pool, and outlined my plans for the space. He examined each document carefully, even walked around the demolition site to get a full picture of what I was doing. "These permits appear to be in order," he said, after a few minutes. "Issued by the city proper signatures, covers the scope of work you're describing. What exactly is the nature of the complaint?" That's when Vanessa finally got her moment to shine, and boy, did she make the most of it. "This is illegal demolition without proper community approval," she announced, pulling out her own folder of fabricated documents. "He's destroying neighborhood amenities without consulting the homeowner association, endangering property values, and disturbing the peace with excessive noise and dust. This kind of destructive activity sets a dangerous precedent for community standards." She handed Detective Stone her fake regulations with the confidence of someone presenting a smoking gun. I had to admire her commitment to the performance, even if the substance was complete nonsense. Detective Stone spent several minutes reviewing Vanessa's documents, comparing them to my permits and asking clarifying questions. You could see him growing increasingly skeptical as Vanessa's story started to fall apart under scrutiny. "Ma'am, these homeowner association documents you've provided don't appear to override the city permits Mr. Foster has obtained. Property owners generally have the right to modify their own land as long as they comply with municipal regulations, which he appears to have done." The disappointment on Vanessa's face was almost comical. She clearly expected the police to immediately shut down my operation and possibly arrest me on the spot. But Vanessa wasn't about to give up that easily. What about the community impact, the precedent this sets, if everyone starts tearing down pools? What happens to our neighborhood character? Detective Stone listened patiently to her increasingly desperate arguments about property values and community standards, but his body language made it clear he'd heard enough. "Ma'am, this appears to be a neighbor dispute rather than a legal issue. Mr. Foster has proper permits. The work is being done safely and property owners have broad authority over their own land. I'd suggest you two try to work this out as neighbors." The detective's professional assessment hit Vanessa like a slap in the face. She'd obviously expected him to validate her authority and shut down my project immediately. Instead, she was being dismissed as a complaining neighbor with no legal standing. But surely there are noise ordinances, dust regulations, something to protect the rest of us from this kind of disruption. Detective Stone glanced at his watch. It was barely 2 p.m. on a Saturday, well within normal hours for construction work. The noise level seems reasonable for this type of project, and I don't see any violations of city ordinances. You might consider having a conversation with your neighbor about scheduling, if the timing is problematic. Before leaving, Detective Stone pulled me aside for a quick word. Document everything he advised quietly. Keep records of your interactions, maintain your permits in good order, and don't let anyone pressure you into stopping legal work on your own property, but also try to be a good neighbor. Maybe give folks a heads up about noisy work, clean up promptly, that sort of thing. I appreciated his balanced approach and his recognition that this was fundamentally about one person trying to control another person's property rights. As his cruiser pulled away, I could see neighbors peeking out from behind curtains, probably wondering what kind of drama was unfolding on their quiet street. Vanessa stood in my driveway for a long moment after the police car disappeared, staring at the half-demolished pool like she was trying to will it back into existence through sheer force of anger. "This isn't over, Elliot," she said finally. There are other authorities, other regulations, other ways to protect this community from people who don't understand what it means to be a good neighbor. The threat was clear, and I realized that Detective Stone's visit had only escalated Vanessa's determination to stop me. She'd lost the first round, but she was already planning round two. That evening I noticed Vanessa's light staying on late into the night. Through her front window I could see her hunched over what looked like a computer, probably researching new angles of attack. Next morning brought a new development in our Cold War. Instead of her usual 7 a.m. photo session, Vanessa appeared at 6:30, then again at 8:15, then once more during my lunch break. She was documenting everything now, building some kind of comprehensive case file about my pool demolition project. Every noise, every dust cloud, every moment when concrete chips might have landed near the property line. The escalation was obvious, and I realized I needed to start playing defense more seriously. That weekend, I spent time talking to other neighbors, explaining my project, and making sure they understood what I was doing and why. Most were supportive, or at least neutral. They could see the pool was a wreck and understood why I'd want to replace it with something useful. A few mentioned that Vanessa had been calling around asking questions about my work and suggesting that property values might suffer if this kind of destruction became a trend in the neighborhood. Pool removal was now 80% complete when I noticed something disturbing about Vanessa's surveillance routine. Every single morning, 7 a.m. sharp, she appeared with her phone camera, photographing my progress from the same angle with the same methodical precision. Day 5, day 6, day 7, exact same ritual. It wasn't just casual documentation anymore. She was building a systematic record, probably preparing for some kind of formal complaint or legal challenge. Then it hit me. Vanessa wasn't just documenting my work. She was building a case for something much bigger than homeowner association violations or noise complaints. Vanessa's surveillance quickly escalated. Every morning at 7 p.m. she'd appear at the property line, filming my every move. It wasn't long before she started yelling, accusing me of violating guidelines and filming me as evidence. It was no longer just surveillance, it was a direct challenge. But the more I observed, the more it became clear that Vanessa wasn't just documenting, she was orchestrating her photos. She waited for moments when the dust was thick in the air, or when I used loud equipment capturing evidence that suited her narrative. Her shots often exaggerated the mess, making the site appear far more destructive than it really was. The breaking point came on a Wednesday morning when I decided to confront her directly. I was refilling my water bottle when I saw Vanessa setting up for her daily photo shoot. So I walked over to the property line where she was standing. "Morning, Vanessa," I said, casually. "Interesting hobby you've developed. Mind if I ask why you're photographing my property every single day?" The question caught her off guard. She'd gotten so comfortable with her surveillance routine that she'd probably forgotten how obviously intrusive it was. "I'm documenting public safety concerns and potential violations of community standards," she replied, holding her phone like it was some kind of official badge. The dust, the noise, the property damage risks. Someone needs to keep a record of what's happening here. There was something almost desperate in her voice, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me that her behavior was reasonable. "This affects the whole neighborhood, Elliot. People have a right to know what's going on when someone starts tearing apart established community features." That's when I pulled out my own phone and started recording our conversation. Well, since we're documenting things now, I should probably mention that this is the 14th consecutive day you've photographed my property without permission. That's harassment, Vanessa, and I'm documenting it right back. The look of shock on her face was priceless. She'd been so focused on building her case against me that she'd never considered how her own behavior might look to authorities. "You can't film me," she sputtered. "I'm on public property conducting legitimate neighborhood watch activities." "Actually, I can film anyone who's standing at my property line photographing my yard every single day," I replied calmly. "Just like you can take pictures from the sidewalk. But systematic daily surveillance of a neighbor's property might raise some questions about who's really harassing whom." I could see the wheels turning in Vanessa's head as she realized her documentation strategy could cut both ways. She had been so certain of her righteous authority that she'd never considered how her actions might appear to an objective observer. The conversation ended with Vanessa retreating to her house. But the photo sessions didn't stop, if anything. They intensified. Now she was bringing a proper camera instead of just her phone, taking multiple shots from different angles, even bringing what looked like a measuring tape to document distances between my debris piles and the property line. She was building towards something big. I could feel it. The question was whether I could stay ahead of whatever she was planning. That's when I decided to get professional help. I called the contractor who'd given me the backup quote for pool removal and asked him to come inspect my work. Dave Martinez had been in the demolition business for 20 years and knew proper procedures inside and out. He spent an hour examining my site, checking my technique, reviewing my permits, and taking his own set of professional photos, documenting that everything was being done safely and legally. "Whoever is complaining about this work doesn't know what they're talking about," he told me. "You're doing everything by the book, probably better than most contractors." Armed with Dave's professional assessment and photos, I felt more confident about whatever Vanessa might be planning, but I also started documenting her surveillance more systematically. Every morning, when she appeared for her photo session, I'd record the interaction from my kitchen window every time she walked past my house during the day, which had increased to 3 or 4 times daily. I'd note the time and circumstances. If she wanted to play the documentation game, I was prepared to play it right back. The neighborhood was starting to take sides. A few people had approached me privately to say they thought Vanessa was overreacting, that property owners should be able to improve their land as they saw fit, but others seemed nervous about the conflict, worried that ongoing disputes might affect everyone's property values more than my pool removal ever could. The couple next door mentioned that Vanessa had been calling around asking about my work schedule and suggesting that other neighbors should consider filing their own complaints. 3 weeks into the project, with the pool 90% demolished, I thought maybe the worst was over. The concrete was nearly all removed, the site was clean and safe, and I was ready to start planning my workshop layout. That's when Vanessa played her nuclear card. Instead of her usual morning photo session, I looked out my window to see her talking animatedly on her phone while standing at my property line. From her gestures and expression, she was clearly filing some kind of formal complaint with someone who had more authority than Detective Stone. Just when I thought Vanessa's photo campaign was her final move, she escalated beyond anything I'd expected. She didn't just call the police again, she called City Hall with accusations that would make my blood run cold. Unpermitted commercial activity and zoning law violations. The stakes had just gone nuclear. The call came at 8:30 on a Thursday morning while I was having breakfast and planning my day's work. "Mr. Foster, this is City Planning and Zoning. We've received a complaint about potential commercial excavation activity at your address. We'll need to schedule an inspection to verify compliance with residential zoning regulations." My coffee went cold as I listened to the clerk explain that someone had reported me for running an unpermitted business, violating zoning laws and conducting commercial-scale construction without proper licensing. The potential fines started at $8.00, with immediate stop work orders until violations were resolved. Vanessa escalated by going directly to city authorities, claiming I was running an unlicensed business and violating zoning laws. Her lies triggered an investigation, risking months of delays. I spent the morning gathering every piece of documentation I could find: permits, receipts for equipment, rental contractor consultations, even photos of the pool's deteriorated condition before I started work. The city inspector was scheduled for 2 p.m., which gave me just enough time to organize my defense and mentally prepare for what felt like a trial, where I'd been presumed guilty. This wasn't a neighbor dispute anymore. This was Vanessa trying to use government authority to force me into compliance with her personal preferences. Detective Stone arrived 20 minutes before the city inspector, which told me Vanessa had probably filed police reports as well as zoning complaints. I understand there are new allegations about commercial activity, he said, looking genuinely puzzled by this escalation. I showed him my documentation and explained how this was purely a personal project on my own property, using rented equipment and my own labor. Someone's really got it in for you, he observed. This level of complaint suggests either serious violations or someone with a serious grudge. The city inspector turned out to be a thorough, no-nonsense professional who methodically examined every aspect of my project. He measured the demolished area, checked my permits against the actual work being done, examined my equipment for commercial markings, and interviewed me extensively about my plans and procedures. These permits are for personal residential improvement, he noted, comparing my documentation to his clipboard. The scope of work matches what I see here. No evidence of commercial activity or zoning violations. Vanessa had positioned herself at the edge of my property during the entire inspection, clearly hoping to influence the outcome by being visible and available for questions. When the inspector finally approached her for her side of the story, she launched into the same speech about community standards and property values, but now with added claims about noise, ordinances, dust violations, and safety hazards. This kind of industrial activity doesn't belong in a residential neighborhood, she insisted. There are commercial zones for this type of work. Ma'am, this appears to be a homeowner improving his own property. With proper permits, the inspector replied patiently. Residential zoning allows for personal construction projects, home workshops, and property modifications, as long as they comply with setback requirements and safety standards. Nothing here suggests commercial activity. I could see Vanessa's face wreathing as another authority figure failed to validate her position. Her nuclear option was turning out to be a dud, and she was running out of official channels to exploit the inspector's final report. Was unambiguous. All work was properly permitted, safely executed, and fully compliant with residential zoning requirements. He even complimented my systematic approach to demolition and debris removal. Whoever filed this complaint either misunderstood what was happening here or deliberately misrepresented the situation. He told me, quietly, the city takes false reports seriously, especially when they waste resources and cause unnecessary stress for property owners following the rules. Detective Stone stuck around after the inspector left, partly to wrap up his own report, and partly, I think, to see how Vanessa would react to this second official rejection of her complaints. She stood in my driveway for several minutes after both vehicles pulled away, staring at the nearly complete demolition site like she was trying to process how all her carefully laid plans had failed. "The system is broken," she muttered loud enough for both of us to hear. "No one cares about community standards anymore." That evening brought a brief respite from the drama. Several neighbors stopped by to check on how things were going, having heard about the inspector's visit through the neighborhood grapevine. Most were supportive, relieved that official authorities had confirmed I wasn't doing anything wrong. A few mentioned that Vanessa had been calling around again this time, asking about property management companies and legal options for dealing with problematic neighbors. The escalation pattern was clear. Every time official channels failed to give her what she wanted, Vanessa found new authorities to petition the pool demolition. Was now 95% complete, with just cleanup and site preparation remaining. Before I could pour the concrete pad for my workshop, I should have been celebrating the near completion of a major project. But instead, I found myself wondering what Vanessa would try next. She'd exhausted homeowner association complaints, police reports, and city zoning investigations. What other official channels could she exploit to continue her campaign against my property improvement project? I got my answer next evening when Detective Stone called my personal number. Instead of showing up at my door, "Elliot, we have a problem," he said, and I could hear genuine concern in his voice. "Vanessa Carter has filed harassment and intimidation charges against you. She's claiming you've been threatening her, interfering with her neighborhood watch activities, and creating a hostile environment. I know this sounds crazy, given what I've observed, but I'm required to investigate all allegations of this nature." The irony was staggering. After weeks of Vanessa stalking my property, photographing my work, filing false reports, and trying to use government authority to shut down my legal project, she was now claiming that I was harassing her. It was the ultimate reversal. The aggressor playing victim, the stalker claiming to be stalked. But I realized this might actually be Vanessa's smartest move yet, because harassment charges are taken seriously regardless of the underlying circumstances, and the burden would be on me to prove my innocence. "I'll need you to come in for questioning." Tomorrow morning, Detective Stone continued, "Bring any documentation you have of your interactions with Miss Carter and Elliot. Be very careful about any contact with her going forward. Even legal activity on your own property could be construed as intimidation if she's filed these charges." As I hung up the phone, I realized Vanessa had found her most dangerous weapon. Yet the accusation that I was the real problem in this dispute. The interview room at the police station felt surreal. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, and the kind of institutional furniture designed to make everyone uncomfortable. I sat across from Detective Stone with a folder full of documentation, trying to wrap my head around the fact that I was being investigated for harassing the person who'd been stalking my property for 3 weeks. Vanessa's complaint painted a picture of an intimidating neighbor who'd been threatening her, interfering with her legitimate community activities, and creating a hostile environment through aggressive behavior and property destruction. She claims you've been recording her without consent, following her daily routines to time confrontations, and using loud equipment specifically to disrupt her peace. Detective Stone read from his report. She also alleges that you've made threatening statements about her personal safety and her right to monitor neighborhood activities. I listened to this alternate reality version of our conflict with a mixture of amazement and frustration. Every interaction had been flipped. My documentation of her surveillance became stalking. My responses to her complaints became threats. My legal property work became targeted harassment. The beauty of keeping careful records became clear as I walked Detective Stone through the timeline of our dispute. Every photo session Vanessa had conducted, every false complaint she'd filed, every escalation she'd initiated was documented with times, dates, and often audio or video evidence. This pattern suggests that Miss Carter has been the primary aggressor in this situation. Detective Stone observed after reviewing my evidence, her claims don't align with the documented facts or with my own observations during previous visits. But the most damaging evidence for Vanessa's case came from other neighbors who'd grown tired of her increasingly erratic behavior when Detective Stone canvassed the street. For witness statements, 3 different households reported that Vanessa had been pressuring them to file complaints against me, making increasingly wild claims about property damage and safety hazards. One neighbor had even recorded a conversation where Vanessa suggested they coordinate false reports to force authorities to take action against this destructive element in our community. The evidence strongly suggests that Miss Carter has been engaged in a campaign of harassment against you. Rather than the other way around, Detective Stone concluded filing false police reports is a misdemeanor offense and I'll be recommending charges. If this pattern continues, I'm also going to have a very serious conversation with her about the consequences of making false accusations. The relief was enormous, not just because the charges would be dropped, but because an objective authority had finally seen through Vanessa's manipulation and recognized the real dynamics of our conflict. The community reaction to Vanessa's false harassment charges marked a turning point in neighborhood sentiment. Word spread quickly that she'd tried to have me arrested for harassment while she'd been the one doing the stalking and intimidating. Neighbors who'd previously tried to stay neutral began openly supporting my position. The couple next door mentioned that they'd been keeping their own records of Vanessa's behavior, worried that they might be her next target if my project succeeded. Even more telling was the revelation that I wasn't Vanessa's first target. Detective Stone's investigation had uncovered a pattern of complaints she'd filed against previous neighbors. Reports about fence heights, landscaping choices, parking arrangements, and noise levels. In every case, the complaints had been either exaggerated or completely fabricated, part of Vanessa's ongoing campaign to control every aspect of neighborhood life according to her personal preferences. She's been using the police and city services as weapons in personal disputes. Detective Stone explained that's not just inappropriate, it's potentially criminal depending on how false the reports were. The city takes a dim view of people who waste public resources on petty neighbor disputes. The conversation ended with a formal warning that any further false reports or harassment from Vanessa would result in charges being filed against her rather than investigated as legitimate complaints. That afternoon, I returned home to find the street unusually quiet. No surveillance from Vanessa's position at the property line, no mysterious phone calls or dramatic confrontations. For the first time in 3 weeks, I was able to work on my project without feeling like I was being watched and documented by someone looking for reasons to shut me down. The pool demolition was finally complete. The debris was cleared, and I could begin planning the concrete pour for my workshop foundation. But the quiet felt ominous rather than peaceful. Vanessa had escalated through every official channel available: homeowner association complaints, police reports, city inspections, and false criminal charges. Each failure had only increased her desperation and anger. Someone that invested in controlling a situation doesn't usually give up just because the authorities tell them to stop. I had a feeling Vanessa was planning one final move, something desperate enough to match her level of frustration. I got my answer the next afternoon. Detective Stone was finishing up his final paperwork on the harassment investigation when we heard shouting from the direction of my house. Through my kitchen window, I could see Vanessa marching across my yard with what looked like a sledgehammer in her hands, screaming loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear, "If you won't save this pool, then I will." The sight was so absurd and terrifying that for a moment I couldn't process what was happening. Then reality hit. Vanessa had completely snapped Detective Stone was already moving toward his car when Vanessa raised the sledgehammer above her head, clearly intending to attack either my equipment or what remained of the pool structure. "Get back!" he shouted using his command voice as he approached the scene. But Vanessa was beyond reason, screaming about property values and community standards while brandishing a weapon on someone else's property. She'd crossed the line from harassment to criminal trespass and assault with a weapon. The neighborhood guardian had become the neighborhood threat. Vanessa stood in my backyard with a sledgehammer raised, screaming about community standards as the neighborhood watched. Her face was red with rage, her hair wild and her voice shrill. She'd completely lost touch with reality. "This pool represents everything good about this neighborhood," she shrieked, taking a swing at one of my concrete piles. "I won't let you destroy our community for your selfish projects." Detective Stone approached, but Vanessa was beyond reasoning. She spun to face him, clutching the sledgehammer. "You don't understand property values," she shouted in fury. "Mom, I need you to put down the sledgehammer and step away from Mr. Foster's property," Detective Stone said in his professional command voice. But Vanessa just shook her head violently, backing toward the remnants of the pool structure, like she was making some kind of final stand. "I'm protecting this community. Someone has to stand up for standards. Someone has to stop this destruction." The sledgehammer wobbled in her grip as she gestured wildly, making everyone nervous about where the next swing might land. Detective Stone acted swiftly, calling for backup while keeping Vanessa's attention. Miss Carter put down the sledgehammer he commanded. When she raised it again, he disarmed her, cuffing her as she screamed about injustice. The arrest was witnessed by at least 8 neighbors, transforming Vanessa from the self-appointed guardian of community standards into a cautionary tale about what happens when personal obsessions override common sense and legal boundaries. As Detective Stone read her rights, Vanessa continued ranting about property values and neighborhood character, apparently unable to grasp that her behavior had become the real threat to community peace. "You're all making a terrible mistake," she yelled as she was loaded into the patrol car. "This will ruin everything we've worked to build here." The immediate aftermath of Vanessa's arrest brought a strange calm to the neighborhood. For the first time in 3 weeks, I was able to work on my property without surveillance documentation or complaints. Several neighbors approached me to apologize for not speaking up sooner about Vanessa's increasingly erratic behavior. The couple next door admitted they'd been afraid to get involved, worried that opposing Vanessa might make them her next target. "We should have said something weeks ago," the husband told me. Everyone knew she was obsessed with controlling everything, but nobody wanted to be the one to call her out. The legal consequences for Vanessa were immediate and serious, in addition to the criminal trespass and assault charges. From the sledgehammer incident, Detective Stone filed additional charges related to her pattern of false police reports and harassment. The city also began reviewing her previous complaints against other neighbors, launching an investigation into whether she'd systematically misused public services for personal vendettas. Her position on any neighborhood committees was obviously finished, and a restraining order prohibited her from contacting me or entering my property, with the drama finally behind me. I was able to complete my project in peace. The concrete pad was poured perfectly, creating a smooth, level foundation for the workshop I'd been planning all along. The space that had once housed a cracked, unusable pool became a clean, functional area where I could work on engines and equipment without bothering anyone. The transformation was dramatic. Instead of a 20-year-old eyesore that contributed nothing to the property or community, I now had a productive workspace that actually added value to my home. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the neighborhood. Vanessa's obsession with protecting property values had led her to attack a project that genuinely improved both my property and the surrounding area. The workshop was clean, well organized, and professionally finished. Exactly the kind of home improvement that real estate professionals recommend for increasing property value. Several neighbors commented that my renovation looked better than the old pool had, even when it was functional. 6 months later, the neighborhood had returned to normal, but with a healthier dynamic than before. Without Vanessa's constant complaints and surveillance, people felt more relaxed about maintaining their properties according to their own preferences rather than her arbitrary standards. The couple across the street finally painted their fence the color they'd wanted for years, but had been afraid to choose because of potential pushback. The family 2 doors down installed a vegetable garden in their front yard, something they'd avoided because Vanessa had complained about previous neighbors' landscaping choices. Property values in the area actually increased over the following year, partly because of general market trends, but also because the neighborhood became known as a friendly, reasonable place to live, rather than the tightly controlled community Vanessa had tried to maintain. Real estate agents began marketing the area as having relaxed community standards and owner-friendly policies, attracting buyers who wanted the benefits of suburban living without excessive restrictions on property use and improvement. My workshop became something of a neighborhood asset, as I'd hoped it would. I started fixing lawnmowers and snowblowers for nearby residents, providing convenient service for equipment that would otherwise require trips to expensive repair shops. The space also served as a community resource during the big storm last winter, when I was able to repair several neighbors' generators and keep their heat running during power outages. The pool had never contributed anything to community life, but the workshop regularly helped make everyone's lives a little easier. The final chapter in Vanessa's story came about 8 months after her arrest, when she quietly moved away from the neighborhood. The criminal charges had been resolved with fines, community service, and mandatory anger management counseling. But her reputation in the community never recovered. The restraining order and her history of false complaints made it impossible for her to resume her self-appointed role as neighborhood enforcer. According to the gossip network, she'd found a house in a different town where homeowner association rules were more extensive and strictly enforced, perhaps a better match for her personality. And that's how I turned a pool disaster into a perfect workshop and transformed a crazy neighbor into a cautionary tale. Sometimes the best thing you can do with something broken, whether it's a pool or a toxic person, is remove it completely and build something better in its place. The pool is gone, Vanessa is gone, and I have a workshop space that the whole neighborhood benefits from. If you enjoyed watching Karma catch up with someone who definitely had it coming, smash that like button and subscribe for more justice-served content. Comment below and tell me, have you ever had to deal with a neighborhood tyrant? I want to hear all about it.